Hey, Michael Ostrolenk here, and I'm with Jeff Banman. He's the author of this book, When It All Goes to Hell: Thoughts on Chaos and Crisis from a CIA Counterterrorism Operator. He co-wrote it with Drew Williams. It's good to see you, Jeff.
Hey man, how are you?
Excellent. I'm very excited to have this conversation. You and I have had many conversations offline, but I want our viewing and listening audience to know the full depth and breadth of Jeff Banman, what he has to offer. And this is an amazing book to share your many, many decades of wisdom. And that could be a good kind of entry point. Like talk to us about Jeff the fireman, the ranger, the agency guy. Walk us through your history there a little
Yes,
bit.
the idiot.
All those things. Complex human being.
Goofball. Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. This was not the book I was writing. Uh, and I think you and I even talked about that. Like uh this came out really only a few months ago. I mean, as I was kind of writing this other book, which shall remain nameless at the point in time, and doing all my research. And I mean, all the same stuff we're going to talk about today, just kind of in the right context. And I was laying in bed one night and it was just like, like the voice of God was like, write a book titled When It All Goes to Hell. And I'm like, okay, we will. And I'm actually, it's, it may sound a little tongue in cheek, but honestly, that's kind of how this came about. And because I knew I needed more time on this other stuff and doing some more research and diving in onto some things. Um, and I was laying in bed and realized, was like, dude, you have written manual upon manual. You've been writing for years. You've tried to figure out a lot of what's in this book comes from that operational mindset course that I developed forever a day ago that I taught for so long. And I've tried to figure out how to turn that into a book for years and just couldn't quite do it. But over these last few years, everything has been solidifying now, right, at a pretty consistent pace, and really validating in all the work that I did years ago. And so now I feel like there's a way to articulate and express it uh, in a cool way. And this was a lot of fun because this felt like one, it was very cathartic. And two, it feels like it enabled me to complete the last, 50 years of life in many ways. Uh, because all of the work I did and all the study and all this, deep dive into human behavior and human performance and the human being was all in this context, right? Was all in this context of crisis and chaos and operations and war and emergency response and all these things. And so I really felt like a good place to kind of start to bring it together and a good kind of first step into the market, if you will, as an author. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that, and I do want you to talk a little about your past, your history, because you'll understand like why you came to some of the conclusions that you now hold. But yeah, I think the timing. I was just thinking about this when you were sharing. Like the timing of this is perfect because we've been living in a VUCA environment for a while, and I think just getting more VUCA,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we need people more capable of stepping forward and leading in their own lives, leading in their communities, and without the ability to manage themselves differently than they mostly have in the past, our chances are not forget thriving, but our survival diminishes
Right.
over time.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about your origination story? Who's Jeff Banman, the Firehouse Jeff, the Ranger Jeff,
Yeah.
Agency Jeff?
Yeah, man. I mean, I was just a stupid kid slinging pizzas at Domino's at 16 when one of the drivers had like come up one day and popped his trunk and had fireman gear in the trunk. And I'm like, where'd you get that? And he's like, I joined the fire station. I'm like, you can do that? He was like, yes, you can. And so, you know, day later, I convinced a buddy, I'm like, hey, come ride with me at least. I'm going to go check this thing out. And walking in the firehouse with this stupid, goofy haircut at 16, he's like, going to be a fireman. Uh, and it's literally, I mean, I think like 4 months, maybe 6 months max. I'm done. Like the way that all lined up, fire school is starting, this and that, boom, boom, boom. 6 months in, I'm 16 years old, riding third person on the fire truck, like minimum staffing. Here we go. So, that started a very interesting path. And, even then I kind of knew by about 18, I knew that I probably wasn't going to be a 30-year guy somewhere. I didn't quite know why. I knew I just wasn't going to like be a fireman forever. Um, and started looking at other things and other options and government organizations and who are you going to go to work for, figured my life expectancy at the FBI would have been about 32.3 seconds. So that wasn't a good choice. I'm not a, I'm not a straight and narrow kind of guy. Um, you know, and so just kind of exploring those things, and the military seemed like a good option. So a couple years into being a career guy, when I was like, okay, this is this really going to be it, every day. Happen to run into, I mean, literally happenstance. I think we were shopping for groceries and the recruiting station was right across the street from the firehouse. And, Sergeant Anthony Hollywood Harrison from First Range Battalion was now doing his recruiting tour. Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, dude, you can't
Nice.
talk about my life without, like, I didn't plan any of this. And, we, of course, he came by and talked to us. We're talking to him. And I said, oh, I thought, I said, oh, you need to come see me. So, I strap a radio on, walk over to the office one day and start talking. And he had come out of First Range Battalion, was all stoked, excited, and just, and I'm like, oh, hey, that looks cool. Let's go do that. So however many months later, I, Jeffrey A. Banman, do solemnly swear, uh, and off I went into the military. Spent my time with Range Battalion and reconnaissance unit, and Kosovo in '99, and then opted to get out and back to the emergency services and fire service. And then, 9/11 happens, and then get involved in some stuff, different programs and training people. I was a very eclectic guy at that point. You know, you, After that period of time, you've got both the Army time, you've got combat experience from Kosovo and that theater, and then you've got, all the emergency response stuff. But on top of that, like I'm a chemical biological response expert. I'm all these stupid things you get, right? And was working some programs and helping train and develop people that are getting ready to deploy, and a bunch of people from the agency were there. And somebody was like literally like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like this. They're like, you want to come to work for us? I was like, yeah. 6 months later, I'm in Africa, working on my first counterterrorism operation. Like total. I mean, it's like Kate, my daughter, she's like, Dad, I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
wait to just write the book on your life, one day.
Yes.
Because I won't ever do it. But so you end up there, and then you go through this process of life and training and development and a variety of other things. And, I'd always been hyper curious about the human and how we function, always from a very young age. I grew up in an environment where my radar was up constantly and constantly looking and assessing and seeing things. So I was very well trained from an early age to do the things I did, and operate in chaos and crisis and stress. And, um, uh, so, it was an interesting ride, but, I developed my first full scale exercise at 17 in the firehouse. I wanted to create this hyper realistic environment because I knew we weren't training effectively. We were just ticking the boxes, just check boxes, check boxes, check boxes. And I'm looking at people on the fire ground at that time and seeing the limitations, all right, seeing where we aren't going far enough, seeing where decision making cycles were stopped because they didn't have exposure to a lot of things, and at that time in the fire service, we were still running a decent amount of fires, but not, not every day, right? And so you didn't have that level of consistent daily experience, on the job experience to draw from. And my mind really started to look, okay, then how do we take as close to the real world as possible and bring it in and craft these environments so that we can kind of exercise things? And that carried then through the rest of my life, uh, in almost everything I did, and then got really hyper focused on that during my time at CIA, both there and kind of on the outside work I was doing as well. Started diving into, I don't know, 2002, 2003. By 2005, I was using heart rate variability to assess performance and understand, what was going on at different times and load on the system, what was happening, what were the stress being placed on there, and where was that coming from, and really getting into the analysis of it. And those things just continue to build over time. And when you've got access to really brilliant people and I'm a geek at heart, so I'll pull out the research paper and, start digging through. And I could really see at that time, you're probably talking now 2008, 9, 10 time frame. I was really beginning to see that, the physiologists, the psychologists, the neuroscientists, like they were all looking at very similar things, but they were just staying very much in their own lane because they have to.
Yeah.
Um, and and I started weaving, right? I started kind of basket weaving. I started pulling and understanding and looking at, all right, this is the human as a system. And that really helped me begin to understand the pockets, right? To look at not just you or just what's going on in your psyche. I write about in the book, I've struggled with mindset,
Mindset. Yeah. Yeah.
my
Yeah.
whole
On my
life.
list
Yeah.
to talk to you about.
Yeah. I mean, and over time for me, that became the set of minds that comprise the human system, right? That there's a ton of information flow that our psyche is the last thing, right? It is all the signals are coming, and then the psyche is the broadcast mechanism, if you will, right? To tell us what's going on. But we have made a massive departure from that. And then we think it works backwards. And so we get this, what I call this backwards working brain system, if you will, generating our own fear, worried about things, doubt, all this crap that ruminates, that then is sending reverse signals into the system, confusing it, disrupting it, and blocking it from actually being open to receive what it needs to receive. And the problem with that today is when I'm in a generated spot and I'm, producing all of that internally, the ability to stay connected to the environment and actually read isn't. And so we're so numb to a point that by the time we're in it, we're way in it, and then those two collide, and well, here's your t-shirt, you're screwed. Yeah, yeah, have fun with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that's where this all kind of came from, right? Really understanding human behavior in the extremes and breaking it down to understand psyche, nervous system, inputs, outputs, decision making, all the correlation of points of stress, the multiple layers that come on board, all of it, man. It was just it's wild to me.
And when you're in the agency, the ends were to give the operator greater capacity to deal with whatever they're dealing with when they're downrange or in a foreign
Yeah.
country dealing with whatever they're dealing
Yeah, I mean, just
with.
kind of across the board, right? I mean, just some basic fundamental things. And then, um, and really, I talk a lot about, how to put yourself in the condition for this moment and the next. When I say immediate future, it's literally like, what's next?
Yeah.
And, I talk in the book about what it's like to be regulated versus dysregulated. I think the big break out there that a lot of people don't think about, it's like, how do I stay calm in chaos? Well, calm looks different in chaos than it looks outside of chaos. So kind of defining
Yeah.
what calm looks like, right? Stable, deliberate, decisive, right? Being able to kind of assert yourself. And so I often say regulated is the internal state is matching the external conditions, where dysregulated, the internal state is mismatched, right? I could be way over, I could be way under, like I'm out of alignment with what's happening. And so how do we bring that in is a lot of what we deal with.
And which I think is amazing for like the viewing and listening audience. Through not all special operators are not with the
Yeah.
intelligence community.
Yeah.
Like this is just stuff because chaos is not just being in combat or doing a drop or whatever your people used to do. It's like life, like what happens in day-to-day life. And in some cases, this doesn't happen day to day, but like there are some crazy social things going on in our world that you might accidentally find yourself in, or some places crime is so high that
Yeah.
you're in a chaotic situation.
We're just
Dot
fragile.
dot dot.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, we're just fragile. And, I think while half the book, and you've read it, and that's why I asked Drew to join me on it. I mean, Drew was a SWAT commander for ever, outside or in a major metropolitan area outside Denver. Super sharp guy. Really, I believe Drew's the kind of man who just has a very balanced approach, very thoughtful. And, so I wanted to accomplish two things with this book. One, really explain, which I don't think a lot of people do, how you take care of you or prepare yourself internally, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, for navigating crisis and chaos in those moments. And then also just like, here's some thought exercises. Here's things to consider that you may not. And here's my thought or Drew's thought on how we might handle things like that. And so, most books around preparedness or anything else, it's all, what are you going to buy? What's your go bag? It's just blah, blah, blah,
Yeah,
and all that stuff is worth absolutely zero if you can't navigate it. I got nothing for you. So I really wanted to bring, what is the secret sauce to performance? Why is a special operator a special operator? What makes that person different, better, stronger, faster um, than the average person? And then how can you begin to close that gap? And what you find is, if you're really paying attention, it's just, there's not that big a gap to fill, right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You talk about in your book the three C's, and I think that might be a good way to start kind of getting entry into the book. And
Sure.
obviously, we want people to read the book when it all goes to hell. So
Yeah.
we're not going to tell all of Jeff's secrets.
Well, we can
but
talk
two
about
things
it.
kind of stand. But two things stand out. I like it. I'd love for you to talk about the three C's. Then we'll also talk about the intuitive guidance system. I think those are
Okay.
two kind of big pieces of the
Yeah.
totality of your program.
Yeah, I mean, as I was kind of digging through it, I'm starting to look at, when I realized that we needed to move from a tactical model, kind of the checklist training model. Okay, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, cool, right? In some kind of created conditions, right? Some kind of basic scenario. Most of training across the world is very focused on, like, complete task A, cool, check. You're good. You can now do that. And the scenarios are okay. They're all right. But they're very kind of one-for-one exchange based stuff. And I really wanted to understand, like, the deep intrinsic elements or traits that exist in top performing people, right? In people that we look at that were like, oh, hey, I'd go to war with you, or, hey, you're a stellar CEO, or whatever it is, right? Let's look at the people who have proven uh, track records of success, right? Can reliably deliver. And what are kind of the intrinsic elements there? And so after crap ton interviews and digging and looking and really just listening, like sitting with some of these people and letting them tell their story, and actually listening through how they describe certain moments, what was there, how they, talked about their decision making or whatever it might be, it really started to surface that these three elements, traits, whatever you want to call them, were consistently at a higher level than most people. And so it's what I call your C3, right? Which is your level of comfort, your level of confidence, and your level of creativity. And, I use comfort because, like, you are going to have to make a cross into the threshold that you are comfortable being uncomfortable, right? A willingness to be in environments and places or situations that you may not normally choose to be in. And I'm not telling you got to be like, oh, hey, this is cool, I can go hang out wherever. But it's not tearing your system apart. I mean, it'd be like, if I took my mom to Tijuana today, she'd be like, all freaked out. I'd be like, what? We're going to the taco truck down the street. It's 2 years. It's Mexico. You know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't bother me, but she'd be totally freaked out. She has a very low level of comfort, especially in that kind of scenario, right? There's a breakdown there. And if there's a breakdown there, then, you've kind of lost the whole spectrum of stuff. So being uncomfortable is a big part of the game. The second piece within the confidence, which I like to say, faith in self, right? This is faith in who I am, faith that I'm comfortable being uncomfortable, that I can rely on my training, that I have an ability to figure this thing out, And then the third part is the creativity, right? That level of openness, that level of understanding, that ability to look at a situation and be like, oh, this isn't going as planned. What are we going to do? Right. And make those moves and adjustments and learn to flow with the environment, and it's like if you're going to get in a fight and you don't have anything with you, where are you grabbing pens or what forks or spoons, or like, does your brain turn on like that? To say, hey, I'm confronted with something and I need to bring all my creativity to figure this problem out. Um, and that can be at big scale, and that can be in business and in life and in partnership or marriage, like, it doesn't matter. So comfort, confidence, creativity just are like the base components that have to exist. And I also believe they're scalable, right? Uh, you may have some in some areas, and you may be lower in other spots, but it's a benchmark for the average person to be like, oh yeah, I can be there, or I'm comfortable in this space. I see what Jeff's talking about. Okay, yeah, I can figure myself out. Oh yeah, I can solve some problems, or not. So that's the big
Okay, let
piece
me
of it.
ask you.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question on the confidence, because I imagine there's both skills and capacities, and also knowing what you know, and knowing what you don't know.
Mhm.
Like,
Yep.
okay,
Yeah. I mean, it is the willingness to be comfortable being uncomfortable, the faith and confidence in myself that I will sort it out. Like, at the end of the day, that's how you show up,
yeah, yeah,
and it's not going to go as planned. In the book, I talk about it, when we were in the military and jumping out of airplanes, we used to make the joke that, the first jumper out of the plane is the plan, right? 3 minutes out, doors open or tailgate comes down, and there goes all the paper, you know, all the op order you just spent days and weeks or however long writing and planning for. It's out. Now let's go do our job and figure it out. So, there is that. It's like base jumping or anything else these
yeah.
crazy people do. You just got to hit that release point, and then life takes over. How you exist there is really a matter of your C3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me
Is
ask you
that?
about the creativity too, because I know
Yep.
I love the whole systems approach. You've kind of expanded mindset beyond just cognition to the whole system, which
Yeah.
is awesome. I would imagine, one way to consider creativity is not just a cognitive process. Like, you actually have I would imagine, this, correct me if I'm wrong, like the whole nervous system has to be open, pliable, and adaptable. It can't just like, I can think clearly, I can think more creatively. No, the whole system has to be open for true, or not true, but greater creativity to emerge. Is that accurate
Yeah, I,
assessment?
I think so. I mean, it kind of goes to what we'll talk about here in a little bit as we start to get into the intuitive guidance system and this, what I refer to as the safe mechanism, in the human system, where, I mean, that's what's 24/7, 365, every millisecond. That's the question being asked. Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Whether that's physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, like that's the lower system at work. And, when you, let me kind of walk through those, because then this
Yeah,
is where I think
please.
the answer
Yeah, that's
hides,
important.
right?
Yeah,
So when I talk about the safe mechanism in the book, you have, and they're in this order, for at least my order, for a reason. Someone way smarter than I may come along and say something else, but first we got to be physically safe, right? Like, if you aren't physically safe, whether you're mentally safe or spiritually safe or emotionally safe, like, it doesn't matter. So first I have to be able to trigger, am I physically safe? And that's kind of a yes or no question, right? And so when I can be physically safe in my space or in my context where I am, I can actually start to look at other areas. So when I look at physical safety is being safe in context, right? It's being safe where you are. When we go to the next step, I like to put the next step as actually spiritually safe. And the way I speak about spiritually safe is safe in self. And this is where things start to break down related to your question, right? Um, am I safe with the essence of who Jeff is, right? Me, my identity, not the meat sack, not the physicalness of me, but who I am, right? And you can extend that into your belief structures if you want, et cetera. But fundamentally, physically safe, safe in context, spiritually safe, safe in self. And this is the big component piece when it comes to creativity, confidence, all that stuff. If that, I may be able to navigate the unsafe physical environment, right? And do that. But if I'm not safe in self, as you get to the book, you talk about like the breakdown in the perception of abilities and a few other things. But if I'm not safe in self, I'm really closed off. Like my systems are shutting down. I'm not getting everything I need to get from, my whole system, right? The third point is mentally safe, or no, excuse me, emotionally safe. So I say that's safe in expression. Um, and we talk a lot about emotions in the book and how to use them or how they show up in times of crisis. And then the last piece is mentally safe, and that is safe in thought. And so here's the thing. If I can't register, like I can feel safe in a war zone. My system is comfortable being uncomfortable in that environment because I've trained and dosed myself and I've pushed the boundary out far enough over years, right? So I'm not physically unsafe in that environment, which then enables me, and I feel pretty safe in who I am, especially in that environment. I'm good, I can sort and navigate and figure it out. Then I'm safe in my expression, meaning I'm good, right? If somebody posted the internet on Facebook, like, does the audiobook come with Jeff yelling? From one of the young firemen that, I think he was 16 when I was, in my mid-20s. So he got the older version, get the hell in the door, gotta get in there, and uh, but I was comfortable with my expression in that environment, in that space. And then the last piece is, am I safe in my thought, right? Is my head okay? I don't have any doubt lingering or the garbage running around. And so all of that has to really align in order to break out your comfort, confidence, and creativity, right?
Yeah.
If those are inhibited, then this is going to be inhibited. Right. And so this is why I think I wrote in the book, like, we're going to go into the underbelly of human performance. And that's what I feel like we did in a lot of ways. It really, what are the internal intrinsic mechanisms, what I call now the native systems rather than the primal systems, and how do we turn these things back on? And so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. No, I appreciate that. That's a great explanation. And it's a good segue to the intuitive guidance system, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the safe mechanism then triggers,
Yeah.
and yeah. And this came about years ago. I mean, I really, for a long time, the way this started, very Banman-esque, as I was teaching, I would teach, we would talk about the fear response, the structured fear response and work through that thing. But intrinsically, I always knew there was more. Like there were more options than just fight, flight, freeze. I knew there was more depth in there. And so that's how this conversation started. I would, be teaching and I'd say, okay, this is how we start to embed things in kind of our more primal systems at the time, right? And understanding how to leverage emotion in teaching and context in classes to trigger or elicit an emotional response so I could embed kind of scientific information and then ride that wave. And so there was a lot that went into this. But as I kept looking and looking, I'm like, wait a minute, we have really done ourselves a disservice by calling this the stress and fear response, and then made it bad, right? That you don't want this to ever show up. I've had people, had a young case officer tell me once, he's like, I don't have a fear response, or I don't have a fight, flight, or freeze response. I was like, oh, really? Okay. Let's check that out this afternoon when we go outside. I mean, but we have not done a good job teaching and developing just the average person what that is. And because we've isolated into so much, nobody wants to deal with it, right? And then you add any trauma onto it, and with the way that it's taught and framed, nobody wants to touch it. It's like, oh no, I expect, like, I don't want any of that stuff to go on, And so as we began to look at it, it was like, okay, well, what's what's on the opposite end of fight? And that is, the little system, the little intuition, the gut instinct, the little poke in the ribs, the nudge, those little quiet moments. It's like, I need you to pay attention right now. Um, which happens way more often, way more consistent, and is way more important than let's throw down, right? Because this is the pre-incident indicator. This is the early moment that the system is alerting you to something, whether you've seen it or not, whether you've cognitively grasped it or not, something has triggered the system, something is activated, right? And in doing that, if I go, whoa, wait a minute, someone just told me to pay attention, and now I'm paying attention, I'm actually deliberately paying attention, like, what's up? If I don't validate anything, and that I'll give myself that little space to let that sensation settle. But if it doesn't settle, then, and I can't physically identify what it is, maybe it's just time to exit stage fright. Like, why linger? And that's a whole, and that's everything from, hey, wait a minute, to we're going to throw down, and everything that happens in between. That's not going on up here. That's all coming from down here. And so if we look, that's fight. If we look at flee, run away, all the way to, hey, I'm going to go, just I'm going to disengage. I'm going to step away from this, whether for a minute or forever, doesn't matter, right? But again, disengagement all the way to run like hell, like there's a whole bracket in there, a whole process in there, and then all the way from, freeze, don't move a muscle, the bear's going to eat you, all the way down to, I just need to go find some stillness, just a quiet place to kind of be still and settled. And when we begin to look at that in its entire breadth and context, there's no thinking in any of that. There's no inner dialogue. There's no need for cognition in any of that. It's just recognizing and then acting, right? It's recognizing and then taking the action that the system is recommending you take. But we become masterful at overriding that.
I would let me ask you a question about, so obviously self-awareness, you have to be aware this is occurring inside of your system, but I would imagine too there needs to be a sense of trust. And I'm wondering, do you think we're born with the trust, and it's culture destroys it in ourselves? Like, where does that trust go that we don't automatically just do this? We override it, as you use the term override it.
Yeah. I mean, I like to almost say we've corrupted it, really.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of these days I will run the primal journey, which is the journey through uncertainty, fear, trust, and then the ultimate experience of freedom. But I think, it goes back to, to me, it's that confidence phase of the C3, right? That's where trust gets broken, especially with ourselves. Because really that's all you need. I mean, you can hope that somebody will be standing next to you, but offering trust out, like, so I just want to, are you talking about it like just with me and myself? Is that what you're trusting my own intuition, mindset? Yeah, dude, it gets, I mean, it gets eradicated from minute one, in my opinion. I mean, we've talked about it, and that's why here later, probably in the next year, the anchored human stuff starts to come out, the anchored birth and all those things that I'm working on. This has helped me complete something so I can actually now move on, and take some of these ideas and concepts and really bring them into some new areas. But fundamentally, that system starts to get broken minute one, day one. And that's one of the things I worked with Little Man on significantly, is him early understanding physical sensations in his body, like the energy that exists in the system and then the expression of that energy without labeling it as an emotion or anything, right? So we talk about tension or heaviness or weightedness or whatever it might be. Like, what does this feel like? I loved it. I think you and I talked about this when you're at the house in Colorado, when we took his first roller coaster ride on whatever the log, water ride thing was. And we're walking away and he's like, my tummy got a little scared. And I'm like, dude, absolutely, like that
Yeah,
is the exact
yeah,
right descriptor. He wasn't scared. He could just feel that kind of butterfly, awkward, vulnerable sensation, right, in the system, um, and called it out, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, and I can explain to him like why that happened, and he's like, okay. And so, but that's not happening. We're getting shut down. We're getting
yeah.
told, that isn't what it should be, or we're being labeled as whatever, our parent views us as in that moment. And so we're misidentifying. And I mean, it's just a cluster from minute one, which erodes that trust and confidence in your
Yeah.
own system over time. And it's really not even fully a lack of trust. It is a corruption. It's a disconnection.
Mhm.
It is a deadening of all this, because it's tough to feel the world is hard. Trust me, I know it now. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I think if you look at the average person, we're really not, we're doing a massive disservice to ourselves in the long run, because we're limiting so much of our capacity around
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Very, very much so. So I love your like how you just walked us through the intuitive guidance system, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the rational mind because is from my understanding of what I've read of your book, it's not you. Oh, we need to jettison the rational mind and just go into intuition, et cetera, et cetera. Like no, it's a mind. It's part of our
Yeah. How do
minds.
you,
System.
yeah.
It plays a role. Talk about the role the rational mind plays in this.
Yeah, I mean, I framed it, I'm not a big fan. I'll just say, I know where you're going, and I think I understand what you're talking about. If I don't, correct me, and
Okay.
we'll get on track. But the whole rational, irrational mind, the whole, well, that's an emotional response or this or that. Like, I mean, that really did a massive disservice to humanity. And uh, we'll we'll be we'll be calling those people out later in other books and stuff. But
That's right. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh yeah, man,
Exactly.
the whole
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whole timeline from Garden of Eden to 2100s on the wall in the other room with every
Oh,
major
cool.
milestone. Yeah. Um, so here's the way I like to look at it, and this is the way I would teach it before. I looked at us as either we, very elementary, kind of rudimentary space, but we either operate more in the analytical systems or more in the intuitive systems. Okay. Um, and the analytical systems are higher level of thinking, logical order of thought, reasoning, judgment, understanding, cognition, right? All that rational mind stuff.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, which is more irrational than what everybody else calls us, in my opinion, as it comes out. But it's why I look at it as the analytical systems versus the intuitive
Right.
systems, because scientifically speaking, when you experience a high state of arousal, stress, crisis, something's occurred, like your body actually disconnects, from access because this takes too long. Like this is
Yeah.
a time machine. This is not a real time operating system. All real-time operating is done from nose down, amygdala down. This has no value in the immediate present moment. You can think about the past, you can think about the future, you can be creative. And so to understand that you're going to kind of go through this period where you aren't going to have access to all of your faculties or facilities or capabilities, especially
Right.
if
Right.
yeah, if you are not trained or developed for this or dosed for this or whatever, like it's going to be a lot. And your system is going to virtually seize up a little bit. And so what I wanted to give to people was an opportunity to be like, hey, you have a whole nother system that comes alive in this moment. At minimum, know what that feels like so you can ride that until you can get to a place where I can hit a recovery point and start to breathe. I can start to settle down. Now I can start to collect myself. I can assess what happened and where I need to go,
Mhm.
and then go right back to my intuitive systems to be in action. Right. And so this is what I would say how the system functions in that place. Right. So it is all pre-planning, all this, all that, leveraging those systems. World falls apart. You find yourself, driving down the wrong street. Now you're in the middle of a freaking riot. Everything goes haywire in your system.
Yeah.
You won't have access to this. You know, I say, if you think can think your way out of it, you're going to be wrong, you know,
Yeah.
because it's going to be physiologically limited for a period of time. How long? It depends on how long you stay in it, right? It's a kind
Yeah.
of a
Definitely.
personal choice. Um, but when I can reach a place where I can start to turn the systems back on, you know, I've found a point of cover, or I'm out of the immediate threat environment, and I can breathe and I can start to collect myself and I start to regulate my system and be like, okay, this just happened. Here's where I need to go. What do I need to formulate? Pull that plan into place, check in with my intuitive guidance system. How does that
Yeah.
feel? I think we can do that. Cool. Now let's go. You know, I mean, I kind of talked about the example of climbing that 14er very much. Like, if I stayed in my head in between spots, well, you know, your head's not your friend, and especially in
Yeah.
those environments, right? So the rational mind, as it is pretty useless in crisis and chaos, in my opinion.
And I really appreciate the, I mean, we use the correct term, analytical versus intuitive, not versus and intuitive, not rational, but analytical and intuitive.
Yeah.
You know, because there's a lot of people out there who choose one or the other. Oh, this is, and this doesn't
Oh,
exist,
I need
or
to be
this
this.
and
I don't want
that.
to be that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, no, like it's all part of our human systems. The fact that you recognize strengths and limitations and then integrate them, and then offers a bigger roadmap or
Yeah.
model is really, really important.
Yeah. I mean, I talk in the book about, you know, if you are, you know, most people today, I mean, you kind of have your techies and your blue collar people, right? These are all intuitive driven people mostly. These are more analytically driven people, right? You can kind of figure out what you are per se. And then I gave you some processes to, like, you know, if I'm analytically thinking, here's how I can engage my intuitive systems and bring those online. And if I'm more analytic, more intuitive, here's how I can think about things
Right.
more distinctly, which then, because it's all about, literally, it's like, it's just this, you know, U curve of, here we go, spike in activity, body's going to react and respond based on the severity and the impact of the moment. And then I need to reach a point where I can turn all the systems back on and have full capability. Uh, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. I don't want to go too much deeper because it's like people should actually read your book.
Oh,
So,
I don't, yeah, we talk about it.
well, you and I have, which is awesome. I love our off recorded conversations, and it's like, damn, we should have recorded that conversation.
Always, always.
Yeah. So Jeff Banman, when it all goes to hell, thoughts on chaos and crisis from counterterrorism, CIA Counterterrorism Operator. Where can people find your book?
It's on Amazon. It's probably the best spot. You can visit whenitallgoes2.com. Um, and, you know, there's some more stuff there. There's some downloadable, like any of the forms we put in there, the checklists and the things, they're all available for people. And then, uh, yeah, you know, and then
Awesome.
I think Anchor Dad on all the Anchor Dad on all the social media platforms. And so, yeah, hang out, get the book, enjoy it. Send me a note. I'd love to hear, you know, gotten
Awesome.
some really great feedback from it so far. It's been great.
Love to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, great to see you, Jeff. Thanks for coming on. I enjoyed our conversation. And let me encourage everyone to go buy your book.
Thanks, brother.
Bye, buddy. Talk to you soon.